Just did it. We're good.
Awesome.
Okay, recording. Hey, Ray.
Hello.
So thanks everybody for joining. I can do this as quickly or not quickly as you'd like. You'll see I can move at pace. I gave this presentation last Thursday morning, to our local PMI chapter. Certainly a little bit out of the box. If any of you guys are PMPs or any sort of PMI organization member, usually they're IT people. I would say probably 90% are IT people. And for me, from a project standpoint, being a PMP has been positive, because when we walk in on a project, you know, IT always says, we're special, you don't understand us. I'm like, I'm a PMP, I speak your language. So it's, from a certification standpoint, that part's been kind of fun. But one thing I've always struggled with is when we go to the annual conferences, or, you know, we do these breakfast meetings, roundtables, every month, and I'm in a couple different chapters of PMI. It's all about IT, Agile, which is really fun because it helps me learn about some of our clients and things that we're building when we're doing software engineering groups. But what it lacked to me was just something different. You know, I'm not an IT person, so how do we make it different? So I came up with this idea about a year ago, and then with the time of COVID, I raised my hand and volunteered to the local chapter to do how do you use your skills for hobbies, and just start the conversation. Because as we've all talked about, I think on happy hours and stuff, like, we're all the people that plan the dinners with friends. We're the ones who plan the vacations. Like, we naturally just use our skills constantly. And I kind of knew that going in. And so the outcome of this presentation, you'll see some of it's technical. Obviously, racing is a passion of mine. But we ended up opening and doing a chat with the group, just saying, how do you use your skills at other places? And it ended up that there were a couple car people on, a couple now aspiring car people, and a couple people that were just chiming in with, hey, I organize at my local food pantry, you know, I run coat drives. And I just thought it was kind of fun, because I think many of us were born this way, and we're inherently great at what we do, and we do it outside of work and don't think about it. And so that was the goal today, was just kind of to talk about racing and some fun, but also if you guys want to share like how we use it elsewhere and just how it's inherent in who we are. So that was the goal. Thanks for joining. I know everybody's super busy. Again, if you want me to speed up or slow down, you know, participate or just tell me, crank along here. Okay, so I'm going to start sharing my screen, and I have a little presentation. Okay, so can everybody see the screen?
Yes.
Okay. I can't see your video at the same time, or chat box, so maybe Lene or whoever, just speak up if you want to jump in, or maybe Lene, if there's chat or anything, just interrupt me. Okay, so race cars and project management, how running a race team can use your project management skills. So the goal today, or the topic was, I ran a champ car team last December, a year and a half ago, right before all this COVID stuff, down at Sebring. And so I'll walk a little bit through race cars, but also more specifically, basically doing a project charter and project plan related to actually running a race team. So this is me. I think most of you guys know this about me. Can you guys see my mouse as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So just about me, some fun stuff. This was me down at the Porsche Experience Center, both understanding how high-end companies handle customer experience, and then also getting to do a little playing with cars. They have like a 7-faceted testing center down there that you can actually go down to. So I spent my birthday down there about 2 years ago. I flew down for the day and drove Porsches in the wet. It was pretty fun. I also am a pit crew member for a prototype car. So that's my prototype. I call her the Egyptian princess because she looks like she has a headdress on. This was me a couple years ago. Mazda did an article on me because I sold my Porsche GT4 to buy a Mazda. So Mazda was pretty amused by that. So this was part of the photo shoot related to the Mazda piece. And then this is my baby. This is a car I've had for about 8 years. I've raced her numerous times between racing these other cars, and she's my baby. So that's more or less where I am most weekends. Racing has a lot of different facets. So I'm a driver, I'm a crew member, I'm an organizer. I run race control for time trial. So if you think about does anybody watch NASCAR, F1, or any sort of like racing things?
Which
I don't know.
Formula One Drive to
Brittany's
Survive,
like,
and it's a
nope.
really great show.
Yes, yes, yes.
So with that, like if you think about the people, with the headsets on that are calling in, next lap, we need fuel. That's actually me. I run race control for time trial events. So I'm the person calling out, corner 3, black flag, fire, please head to corner 3. There's been an accident. As well as I've been event chair for autocross and time trial events. So I kind of hit it using those project management skills in a lot of different ways. And we're not focusing today on being a driver, but I can say that being a driver to me is almost like a little project every day, right? Because we're prepping the car, we get to the race, you walk the course, you figure out where you're going. And even running a lap of a race, I consider a project, right? You make a plan, you course correct constantly to stay on track, and you get to the end safely. And that's kind of my outlook on how I spend, my weekends is series of projects. I travel around the country with a race team, so this is kind of who I consider my family, and this is my kind of immediate family right here. We've traveled across the country a couple times. This was the car that we raced. This was the team in the car that we raced 3 years ago now, not counting COVID year. And this, you can't quite see it, but when we travel to nationals, we leave for a 2-week trip in Nebraska every September. And so we actually do a full spreadsheet. Ian, you'll be happy, we use shared tools. For that, it's Google Docs, but very similar shared spreadsheet where we do the truck and the trailer and the car and all of the prep and who's doing what, when it needs to be completed, what needs to be packed in the truck, and we all highlight and take assignments from it. So that's part of the organization from our day life that transfers over, and the awesome tools that we have and love to use. So again, today there's lots of aspects of racing, but today we're going to put our shoes in the place of running a Champ Car weekend at Sebring International, and this was December of 2019. A Champ Car race is actually 2 endurance races. So Saturday and Sunday each have a 7-hour race. So not only car prep, but driver maintenance, and all of that goes into the planning. So putting it into PMP, there's 5 stages of project management. So we'll start with initiating. And so we started this project about March of 2019, looking at the race schedule, knowing that we wanted to do 1 major race weekend that year, looking at what races were options, where the team would be. So for an endurance race, there's typically 3 or 4 or 5 drivers, depending how many people and what their personal endurance is. So we actually started planning about 9 months in advance of when the schedule came out, what races would work for people, who the drivers would be, what car or cars we were going to send, what the budget and car prep would be. As you guys can imagine, you can spend as much as you want in a car, in a race car, but we had to figure out what the budget was, how we'd break that budget out between the team, how the work would actually get done. So we didn't want it all to fall on the guy who owned the car in Texas, but even though the race team was coming from New York, Colorado, Florida, and Texas, we actually did some race weekends down there where everybody would fly in and work on the car together. So not just the money, but the work wouldn't fall on one person. And then even the race team. So who's there that weekend supporting? Because in enduro, you always have somebody getting out of the car, getting in the car, and then the people who need to do the fuel and the tire checks and the safety checks and the race control and all of that. So that started about 9 months ahead of the race. We create a project charter, as any good project manager would. We had our project objectives was to complete 1 race weekend with 2 7-hour endurance races. Now, complete was the actual operative word here. For a car to complete an endurance race, sometimes there are choices. And a car can certainly go faster. Sometimes assuming there's not an unlimited budget, a car can go faster, but sometimes that might end up with reliability issues. And so this team actually set out to say, we want to complete the races. Our goal is to get to the end of both races. We ended up deciding to race 2 cars, so effectively 4 races over the weekend. And the dream being that we actually got all the seat time we could have. Since this team, these were all working professionals, not unlimited budgets, not unlimited vacation time, that this was truly our highlight of the whole year. So we didn't want a car to break the third hour of the first day and not be able to be repaired. And so that was really our main objective, was just getting as much seat time and having as much fun as possible. Again, scope, we ended up with 2 cars. You'll see some pictures later in here. And the scope being that repairs and preparation to make sure that they were as stable and reliable as possible. Team members was the owner, a guy named JC, owned both cars, as well as the tow vehicle, and the drivers and the pit crew. Business case and budget, we were privately funded, so everybody determined what our intended budget would be and potential overage would be, due to unknown things you find in cars and engines when you start working on them. And then the deliverables would be the car repair and restoration, the preparation of the actual tow to the event, and the accommodations at the event. Stakeholder the major stakeholder was JC, the car owner. Any questions so far? Speed okay? Faster, slower?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So Becca, so were all the cars the same type of cars?
Nope, not at all. So Champ Car is meant to be amateur racing, lower budget. It can be any car. So I think there's only, if I recall, there's only 5 classes of Champ Car, and you fit in based on engine displacement and tire size and things like that. So there are certainly some more popular cars, but we ran a Mazda RX-7, an older, like circa 1980s, and a Porsche Boxster. So very different scheme.
Becca, how many contenders are there? How many other race cars? And are they on the track at the same time, or is this just a timed event?
Yes, no, that's a fantastic question. So not only do we want the car to be reliable, attrition is a real thing. So there were about 40 cars on the track at the same time. And when you start at the starting line, all 40 hit the gas at the same time. So not unlike, Ray, I know you watch a lot, not unlike a NASCAR race where there's an accident before the green, because they actually crash sometimes before the start line. That's real in Champ Car racing. So part of the preparation that we actually went through was things like bringing enough zip ties and duct tape. So if somebody hits our bumper, either we can rip it off or tape it back on. We had a hammer in the pit crew, so if it got stuck in the fender, we would just smash it back out. And so both getting the reliability of our car, but the attrition. So if there were about 40 cars that started, about 25 finished the race, whether it be due to accidents or failure on the own car part. It was really fun. At one point in the race, we were in the midst of a session, so I had nothing to do other than be on the walkie-talkie and listen. So I actually climbed up in the stands at Sebring, and so you can actually see the whole straight. And at one point, part of my race control is calling driver 1 and driver 2, saying, there's oil on the right side of the front straight. Stay left, stay left, stay left, right? And so you'd actually see a car and something happening, and trying to be a spotter and coach your team to not be part of that attrition and just stay out of the wreck. Usually the track, they would close it down and bring out blowers and try to close, but usually that would take a lap. So part of what I did as pit crew was also trying to keep people out of trouble, or it even sometimes attrition is poor drivers, right? So everybody needs to have a racing license to do this. But this could be a person's first race ever. There's no gray area. You have a license or you don't. And so part of attrition would be like driver 2, the blue car in front of you is making bad decisions. Stay clear. So some of that is truly helping the team to figure out to stay out of trouble. Not unlike what we do in our day jobs, I guess, too, right? Any other questions right now? Okay. Budget is a balance. So there's always more to be spent on a race car. We were amateurs, all different budget points of our places in our careers. So we decided that the car prep, we had to balance between the car prep, and we decided to do an engine overhaul. So to the point of making the end, we did suspension, bushings, bearings, an engine overhaul, and then again, we made sure that some of these body parts were easily removable or stuck on again. We had to make a minimum weight for the car, so if we were to lose a body part, we'd have to stick some lead in, but all manageable during a pit stop. And so also working on goals. So a funny one, or not funny, but this team, we knew that the car wouldn't be, to your point, Patricia, are they all the same? They're different. And so by nature, some cars might be more competitive than others in the class that they're running. And also our drivers, realistically, if this was the only race they did in a year, they were rusty. So our goal was really not to win. It was to place mid-pack. It was to make it to the end and just have a blast. People that are going for the top are on simulators every single week. They're putting a lot of money into the cars. This would have, since this is a December race, I think there were about 12 Champ Car races a year. So other people had been across the country a couple times and had a ton of seat time. And those were the people that were winning. Part of racing is just time and effort to get to that level, to hold it together that long. Also planning, I just mentioned engine overhaul, seat fitting. So a fun fact, we had 4 drivers in one of the cars, and they went from 5'7", kind of thinner build person, to a 6'4", 280 build. And with that, the seat in the car is fixed. But we actually did, are you guys familiar, like when you get a package sometimes, how it had like the pour in styrofoam, or that, so like it's like perfectly molded to the package, to your contents that are in the package?
Yep.
We literally do that for the race seat. So you climb in the seat and you get this mold and you're in this plastic thing and it's squishy and you sit right where you want it to be and you make your mold. And we ended up, making that into a solid mold, and that becomes what we literally flip in and out. So we have different length steering wheels. We have different seat inserts that, and then the harness will just get longer or shorter. So that part of our prep for the race was literally making people's seats, practicing getting in and out. We had one gentleman who was in his 70s, so literally getting him in and out of the car through a race cage had some sensitivity and support to it as well. So we actually did a lot of that as race prep, the parts and pieces, and also the practice getting in and out. Okay. We did all fluid changes. So any race car has different like brake fluid and transmission fluid and things that boil at a higher boiling point, or so they don't boil. One of the risks in a race car, if say you were just to take out a car that you have and go do some hot laps and have fun, is that brake fluid can actually boil at a boiling point. And what that creates is air bubbles in your brakes, which means if your brake fluid has air bubbles, it means at a point where you step on them, you may actually have no brakes because they won't be pressurized or fully, the lines won't fully be full. So part of what we do is actually swap out fluids, both trans fluid and brake fluid and all those things that have a higher boiling point that could handle both the length of running at that high temperature as well as just the temperature alone. So those are kind of the preps and the planning that we do ahead. Then, like a normal project, we have our risk management plan. Major parts failure, obviously the probability we call is medium, but the impact is huge, right? So if the engine failed, if we threw a rod bearing, if a suspension piece blew, some of these are replaceable, and we brought spares, some not so much. So what we really focused our efforts on ahead were the things that could not be swapped out. Typical things we bring to a race, and even for my local races, most of my friends will bring spare axles, lower control arms, like things that we can actually just swap out the parts on. But an engine's not something we could have swapped out overnight. Well, some of my friends could, but not something we were looking to do. And then minor impact or body failure. So high probability with 40 cars starting with all different car setups and driver capabilities and experience. The chance of impact is extremely high, but the hope is that it's not significant enough to not be something you can't hammer or stick back together. So we just had duct tape and zip ties and a hammer and a fender roller when we went to the grid. And then time to switch drivers. So the risk was low and the impact was low, but we did do planning ahead, and we did kind of purposely put people that were more similar drive styles or seat positions closer, in the order of 4. But we tested it all out ahead. One of the interesting things is you can't go behind the race wall unless you have a fire suit on. So like that one person in particular that had a little bit of a physical harder time getting in and out of the cage, we had to have somebody in a fire suit there to kind of help him in and out. So for that particular stop, we needed somebody else in a fire suit that was doing fuel, checking tires, replacing ice packs, things like that. Just because we needed the car maintenance still done, but we needed to kind of give that hospitality to that driver as well. Okay, a little bit more risk. This was not necessarily the race car itself, but just around the race weekend. So tire destruction on a trailer. Fun fact, trailer tires do not have the same DOT rating nor testing as a passenger tire. So good to know that our passenger tires that we ride on every day are heavily tested. But B, from a towing perspective, we always carry a spare and then some. Even if a tire is new, they have a much higher failure rate generally. So we almost assume driving from Texas to Florida that we're going to have a tire blow. It's a sad truth in race cars. I luckily, knock on wood, I haven't had a trailer blow on my tire, but like a project manager, I actually replace everything early, carry spares, take test runs with the trailer without load, all sorts of goofy things to try to minimize that on a day-to-day basis or week-to-week basis. Then just another risk is the reality that, these drivers are having these immense G-forces placed on them over long periods of time. So I think just getting the quality of sleep, the quality of health and preparation and fitness, food, for the race drivers for that weekend was important. So we actually we rented a house so we could have a kitchen, be able to control AC, take nice hot showers. And just a fun thing that we do is we analyze race data. So we run video, we run data, and each night, after Saturday's races, we actually sat down and we're, analyzing race lines, lap times. Sometimes, like when I race, I actually look at lap by lap through the day so I can make improvements. This crew, we just kind of gathered the data and looked at night. But there's varying elements of data capture and analysis that we do pretty often. And then proper tools for repair. So we actually brought entire garage toolboxes. And so we had an entire setup in one of the race trailers. We had an enclosed trailer that had all the tools. And so when it came to race time, we actually were able to wheel entire pieces of every wrench and socket of any size that the car needed down to pit lane. So in case something happened, we had all the tools there. And the thing I loved about this owner is he was as meticulous as we are about our projects. So every drawer was labeled. We did like a little tutorial before, like where to find things, what the most important tools were. So it was fun. It was good preparation. Planning, again, we had our timeline, we had a project schedule, assuming both the work on the car, things like pulling the engine, sending it out. We knew it would be out for at least a month to come back, put it back in. We did do a little project timeline for that. The picture on the left is actually Sebring. So that was, where we were hanging out and assessing for the week. I think I talked about much of this. Any questions?
I have a question. So you mentioned something about tires, and that's, when I watch these races, I always see that they take 10 seconds to replace the tire. Why doesn't you use run flats or something that would kind of avoid, because that's part of your planning, right? You want cost avoidance, right?
Yeah. So the tires actually have different attributes on the tread. And so it's less about the tire having failed because of loss of air inside or debeating. And on these, it's more like it's rain, right? So like at Sebring, Florida, right, goes from super hot, sunny to all of a sudden humid to soaking wet to not. And so part of that is actually the choice of tread and tire compound. So even for my car, I have 2 different compounds that I run depending on the weekend. and sometimes 3. So like last weekend, it was only 50 degrees. So for one of the tires I run, they don't stick below 65 degrees. So a tire that I would never use above 65 degrees, I used last weekend because it was too cold for my favorite tire to work. And the same thing happens with wet. So I'll do my little public service plug here. So snow tires, all seasons are no seasons. And if you're anywhere with snow, you should be on snow tires. That's my PSA. But it has to do with the temperature that it can handle and the different tread of whether you're trying to stick to the surface or push the water away from the surface. And even things like rain tires, like they're usually, my rain tires for my race car are actually narrower and more air in them to make them sit proud. So they sit really firm so that it funnels the water away. Versus my race tire, I run with less air pressure and it's wider and flatter. So when it's sticky asphalt and concrete, I'm actually gripping that surface and maximizing the width of the contact patch. So a lot of times, like if you watch F1 or something, they're coming in to change compound. Sometimes NASCAR, it's because the tires are wearing out. The other piece of the puzzle with tires is that the first couple laps, you're actually burning off the mold release that came from the factory. So it's almost a little slippery. So at the beginning of a race or in quali or something, you'll see them like scrubbing the tires. They're trying to not only get temperature into them, but if they hadn't had it scrubbed off before the mold release, so you don't have any grease on the tire. And then you've got some number of laps that the tires are optimal, and then they start to fade. And some tires drop off. There was a tire I raced with last year or 2 years ago, that they were amazing, amazing, amazing. And what they did to make that 200 tread wear legal DOT tire is that they had a 100 tread wear on the outside and a 300 on the inside of different compounds. And so you would be driving and all of a sudden one lap, the car would have 0 grip because you will have burned through the good stuff into the bad stuff to make it street legal. Watching you, Pat, like it's funny, like the rules that are followed, right? But it's
sounds like it's definitely an equivalent to our construction site where you have to understand the field conditions,
yeah,
right, and then kind of prepare for that.
Very, very much so. Very much so. Something else fun to touch on is just safety. So from a safety perspective, you have the car, and in this case, we had a full roll cage. So even if the car flipped over, right, you would end up in some very protected box, which we've seen that especially with the Ryan Newman crash last year with NASCAR. Like the race safety has come such a long way. Then you have the driver inside. So the drivers all had a helmet on and what's called a Hans device. So they actually had their head strapped onto this neck brace, and the neck brace is into their race seat, into their harness. So if there's impact, their head actually laterally cannot move. And then the third piece is what their track is doing. So the track always has an EMT there, fire engine, every corner station has fire extinguishers. So if something happens, like it's about a 30-second time to respond to something on track. So even that kind of stuff, like before somebody goes out, I was pit crew and on headset saying, did you check your belts? Are your belts properly in the Hans? Is your Hans connected to your helmet? Can you hear race control? Like I do a safety check before everybody leaves pit lane too, making sure that we've got everything where it should be, just in kind of to be prepared for the inevitable in what we do. Any other questions? Okay. Executing. So now moving on to our, as you know, a perfectly planned project happens exactly as it should. But we did work weekend after weekend on the car. Engine went to the shop and came back, which was great. The tow to Sebring was actually successful. We did not have a tire outage on the way, and we actually got there ahead of schedule. So from a schedule perspective, these tracks are all rented by the day. And so you can't even get in until the group before you has vacated. So we couldn't get in until, I believe, 5 p.m. BMW Club was coming out. We were heading in. So this picture actually is us on the access road into Sebring. Figured, what the heck? We're off of state roads. Obviously, this race car is not street legal. So we actually unloaded the car and took some parade laps on the access road to do some testing. Because with a race car, unless you've taken it to a race ahead, you really can't test it. You can go up and down your street, but aside from that, it's fairly clear you're not street legal if you were to get seen on the road. And so most of our testing is actually done at the track and in the pits, you know, relatively slow rate, but just getting through transmission, making sure the exhaust is holding, fluids and pressures are holding, things like that. So this was actually us on the access road. We were putting the numbers on the race car. We had just gotten our race numbers from check-in. And then we had our emergency, not emergency, but our last minute to-do list. So they had gotten the car fully ready, except for these things. And Joe hadn't been to a race yet, so we actually had to build his insert when we got to the track that weekend. So this was actually our to-do list for this car, of just the stuff to remember. And we did race 2 cars. We had this car and a Boxster. So we ended up with, that was our motorhome. We had a trailer behind it. And just talking about, you know, driver comforts. So this motorhome, not only did one of the guys sleep in it, but this during the day was used for the guys to be able to take their suits off and cool down, be able to kind of get in headspace, look at video on the TV. So this was kind of like our driver hospitality, I guess we'll call it, and race zone. And then monitor and controlling, again, hitting into the 4th aspect of project management. The pit crew. So we all had different roles. So I was kind of the extra hand. So I did not bring a fire suit that weekend, so I could not jump the wall. We call it jumping this wall to get onto the pit lane. And I was not driving that weekend. So I actually was in charge of getting race fuel, refilling, doing some metrics on how much fuel we were using, which with the different cars. I was in charge. We had something called a cool shirt system. So in the back, right behind the driver's seat, there was a cooler in there, and we were pumping ice cold water, which was connected to a hose in the driver's suit, to try to cool them down, because they were doing, you know, 45-minute to hour stints in Florida, obviously no AC. And the race, you know, it was starting at 60 degrees in the morning. You'd go through that Florida heat and humidity. So a lot of just driver comfort, keeping their heads active, right, and safe were important. So I actually did dry ice runs during the day to get dry ice to throw into the coolers, and running race control and just doing safety checks. So that was a lot of fun as well. I have a little video here. You can just kind of, we'll see. Maybe, can you guys see the video, or are you still on the PowerPoint?
We're still on the PowerPoint.
Okay. You know, I'll send you guys this after if you want. I think if I unshare and share, I don't know what I'll do, but I have, like, this is a 5-minute video. Don't have to watch the whole thing by any means, but what's fun about a pit stop, especially,
I should be able to share it.
Here, do you guys want me to hop over, or do you just want to
Yeah,
look?
I would love to see it.
Okay, let me hop over then. Let me share. Stop sharing. And just one thing to note is that for Champ Car, due to safety, we have to do 5 minutes. So it's not like a NASCAR where you have pit speed limits, but you can go as fast as possible. Here, they basically said an amateur team, if you're doing fuel, then you have a 5-minute minimum. And so if you went too fast, you actually had to sit at the exit of pit lane anyway. So part of it was like doing as much as we can, getting everybody, you know, sometimes we were checking the car, checking the wheels, but we wanted to use those 5 minutes to its fullest because there was no gain to be done any sooner. So let me try to do pit stop. Okay, here. Okay, can you guys see it now?
Yep.
I can't hear the volume though. I don't know if we need to, but we might need some narrative.
And so do you change all the badges on the car when you go to different race?
For this race weekend, each car had one number. So we didn't have to change that between drivers or races, but the number on the side definitely checked in and assigned to us. So this car and the Boxster had different numbers. You can see we've got fuel there. We have a guy with a fire extinguisher here. That's probably adjacent to. There's a fuel catch underneath. You can see that little bucket there. That's the ice. Where the heat. You can see one came out, the other one's going in. Little. This guy's checking to make sure the wheels are all tight. So again, with temperature changes, though, the nuts and bolts sometimes can get looser or tight, not really tight. Sometimes can get looser. So say we torqued it when it was really warm and then it got cooler, things get tighter, and then so we actually go around with these stops and do what's called a wrench to make sure that the wheels. Just go on. Okay.
Yeah, that was neat.
It's fun. It's always exciting seeing them come in and just having everything aligned. And closing of the project is race weekends are fun, but a lot of work. So it was my beloved Chili Dog, who was always my track dog. He always stayed in the pits with us. He'd stick his head in and watch us work on race cars and whatnot.
Oh, I didn't realize that was a dog.
Yep, that's my dog / my pillow. He loved the prototype car, so if we were doing anything on it, he would be shimmying under it, looking at things. We used to call him the inspector, like he was doing a tech inspection for us. He was always a big part of the race weekends.
Too cute.
Yeah. In general, the RX-7 finished 9th overall and completed both 7-hour races, so definitely mission accomplished. Starting with about 40, ending up 9th was pretty darn good. And then the Boxster, in the last minutes, I think it was the last hour of the second day, so 13 hours in, had a fatal crash. So that one did not make the 2, almost made it there, but didn't quite, unfortunately. And key takeaways: our skills can be used for good, not evil.
Yeah.
And then how do we use? So I'm going to turn off now and come back to you guys.
It sounds like a lot of fun, and I think this is definitely our skills is definitely transferable to any project, so-called, that we do.
Yeah, and it's like every project, a layperson never realizes all the work that goes on behind the scenes.
Yeah.
So this was really cool, Becca.
Hey guys, sorry about that. I dropped off for a second. Any questions?
No, that was really, really cool.
It was super interesting. Thanks for sharing it, Becca.
Thanks for the questions, guys.
Yeah. What a busy life you lead.
Yeah.
I know, when she had the question up of like, what are your hobbies? I'm like, I don't think I have anything that compares.
I know, I'm feeling like such an underachiever right now.
Right?
Becca, reminder to stop recording.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. This was awesome. Thank you,
Wow.
Becca.
Yeah.